All right, example 2, part C. So we need to make a relative frequency bar graph of the data and note any differences or similarities between the relative frequency graph and the frequency graph. Okay, so to speed things up, I have made a little bit of a chart. You might see where I made some errors in my copying, but we already had the frequencies and the totals. So I loaded them into my calculator here, and what I did was I took everything from L1 and I divided it by our total of 25,452, 25452. And that's how I got all of those decimals. Now, the decimals in the calculator are not already rounded, or they are already rounded, but they're rounded to however many places they show, not necessarily to 3 places and not necessarily to 3 places properly. So that, let's see here, there was one of these that gave me a problem. The 0.0345, that 5 has been rounded up. So let's see what the actual rounding is going to be by taking L3, and then you hit Math, go right to the numbers, and we want to round second to L2, comma is just above the 7 button right up here. So what do we want to round? We want to round L2. How many places do we want to round it to? To 3 places. And now these are where I got my numbers. Also, I know that rounded to 3 places, I can run stat calc 1 on L3, and my sum should be about 1. And because of the rounding, it became 1.001, but that's okay. We're close enough, and we know that it's from rounding. So that's how to use your calculator to get all of those numbers relatively quickly, rather than having to take each of those 11 numbers in the frequency chart and divide them each individually by 25,452. Now, I also tried to speed things up a little bit by making a relative frequency chart, but I made a few errors, a couple of little mistakes. You can see where I scratched some of them out. So now that makes my graph a little bit harder to read. So if you run into problems like I did here, that's okay. You can always just modify how you did this so that we can shade in the parts that we want to keep, and it draws the eye toward the heights of those parts that we want to keep. You may also notice, so my relative frequencies, I just used the same numbers from my relative frequency portion of the chart. I also put my formats in the same order as we did in part B. And I did that so that we can compare the shapes of the graphs overall. So oldies is where I made one of my mistakes. We only want to go that high. In news and talk radio, I made another mistake. I kind of got them one off a little bit. Religious is the one that goes as high as I said the oldies were supposed to. But now, even though I made some mistakes, I didn't have to make big changes, and I didn't have to do the same thing all the way over again. I want to encourage you to work around, little errors like this yourself in similar ways. Just make it a little bit easier for you and your classmates and whoever is going to read and grade your work, if you can. There we go. Now it's easier to read. And again, I did the same things with my rounding errors in my relative frequencies. Just, I wrote over it and then tried to modify. I should probably have also modified. That's 0.034. So finally, let's make some comparisons. So again, looks like news, talk, radio, religious, and other are our 3 biggest ones. Different scale, but news, talk, radio, religious, and other are pretty much our biggest ones. And we're following the same general pattern as we did in part B. So even though I scaled it differently, the patterns in parts B and C are the same. If something is the highest in the frequency, it will also be the highest in the relative frequency. If something is the lowest in the frequency, it will also be the lowest in the relative frequency.